My best friend Gene and I met because of our FJs, and we are both hardcore Toyota fans. Unfortunately, Gene turned to the dark side and got a 2022 JL Rubicon.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them!
But after spending 4 days building and testing this brand new Jeep, I began to understand why my friend turned his back on Toyota. So in this video, we'll take an engineering approach to compare the Wrangler JL to the good old Toyotas. Are there really enough benefits from Jeep to give up Toyota reliability? Watch to the end and find out. Hi, welcome to Tinker's Venture. I'm Kai. Unlike most mainstream car reviews, I don't really care about big screens or Apple CarPlay, at least for a 4x4. What I'm interested in is real mechanical differences that actually matters off-road. So in my review, we'll go over fitting large tires, suspension travel, high-speed handling, and at last, reliability. Alright, let's get started. Jeep's JL has the Xtreme Recon Package, which comes factory on 35-inch tires. However, Jeep actually took delivery from the dealership on 37s. These were actually installed by Chrysler dealership, speedo calibrated, and retain full warranty. And no, they do not rub, not even at full articulation. All dealer change was mounting the tires. Oof, this is not even fair. You know how much work it took me just to fit these 35s? In the Toyota world, many people claim they fit larger tires, but in reality, they only mean clearing it on street driving. It still rubs when you flex off-road. But that doesn't count. The JL Wrangler can clear large tires so much easier because of its architecture. The solid front axle is positioned much more forward. It vastly improves approach angle and creates a ton of room behind the tires. Body mount chop or pinch while pounding doesn't really exist in Jeep's vocabulary. In addition, when a Toyota goes for true 35s or above, we also need to worry about the top as well as in front of the tire during articulation. Clearing these areas requires tubbing, much more involved than a body mount chop. But for Jeep, the engine bay is much narrower, so there is simply no structural sheet metal right on top of the tires. The downside is Jeep's engine bay is extremely packed, but that's a separate issue. Both Gene's Xtreme Recon and my FJ have 456 gears in the differential. Well, except his came from the factory and mine was the aftermarket. But we both felt the Jeep has a much stronger acceleration from stop, even with larger tires. This is because the JL has a 34% lower first gear than the FJs and Foreigners. And this difference becomes more significant during off-road. Paired with the 4:1 Rubicon transfer case, this Jeep has over double the crawl ratio than my FJ. This gives it much better off-road control. And for highway driving, compared to the ancient 5-speed transmission on the FJs and Foreigners, the JL's 8-speed can keep the engine running at more efficient conditions. Gene and I both did the same 1,700 miles trip from Texas to Pennsylvania. The JL was able to average 17 miles per gallon for the whole trip, while I only got around 15. All in all, in terms of running large tires, Jeep wins by a landslide. Its architecture makes them a breeze to fit, and its 8-speed transmission keeps those big tires turning strong. Now some of you may say, what about lift? You haven't even mentioned lift on either Jeep or the Toyota. Can't you simply add more lift on Toyotas to fit bigger tires? I'm glad you asked. The short answer is, not really. In the next section, we will address the elephant in the room, Jeep's solid front axle versus Toyota IFS. For the vast majority factory suspension, either independent or solid axle, the maximum up travel is limited by the bump stops, and the maximum down travel is limited by the length of the shocks. However, there's one key difference when it comes to lifts. Gene's Xtreme Recon can clear 37s because it has a factory 1.5-inch lift over the regular Rubicon. 37s will clear on a regular Rubicon if you only drive it on road. They will just rub when the suspension articulates. So the key thing here is not really the extra 1.5-inch ride height, but rather the extended bump stops that limit how far up the tire can travel. And in fact, Almost all Jeep lifts come with the bump style extensions, and for a proper solid axle lift, you also come with longer shocks. So we essentially shift the entire range of suspension travel downwards. But this is not true for Toyota IFS. Due to the operating angles for CV axles and control arms, we can at most add only 1 inch extra droop at the wheel. We can definitely still extend the bump style to limit how far up the tire can go, but as you can see, we only have 1 inch to work with before having a net decrease in suspension travel, which is not good for off-road. Most Toyota front lifts don't come with a bump style extension. Therefore, using a suspension lift to clear large tires doesn't practically apply for IFS. And speaking of suspension travel, if you read the brochures,
Wow, you can read the brochure.
both the JL Rubicon and the Toyota IFS have 7 to 8 inches of travel. Sounds like they are pretty much comparable. But there is yet another fundamental difference here. For solid axle, that number refers to the straight up and down travel, like when you go over speed bumps. However, solid axles have a second mode of movement for articulation. As the axle tilts, we realize additional wheel travel due to geometry. It is like a multiplier effect. To see how much extra articulation the JL has, we remove the springs and fully flex out the front axle. You can see as we jack out the passenger side, the driver's side wheel starts to go further downwards, even though the driver's side shock was fully extended the whole time. When we fully compress the passenger side bump stop, we measured a whopping 13 inches of articulation. IFS, on the other hand, has only one mode of movement, so it is the same 8-inch travel for both speed bumps and articulation. My long travel IFS is capable of 13-inch of travel, but that is after spending $6,000 and replacing every part in the front end. And just imagine where the Jeep will be with the same amount of mod. But wait, there's more! Not only does the solid front axle have more maximum articulation, it can also utilize that better in real-world situations. Let me show you. When I flex my long travel FJ in this corner travel index test, I measure around 9-inch articulation from the front and 15 from the rear. In a cross-axle articulation like this, the IFS behaves stiffer than the rear solid axle, so we observed an imbalance. In contrast, the Jeep solid front axles articulated 12.5 inches, and the rear did 11.5, almost perfectly balanced front to back. You can also see the body of the Jeep was noticeably more level. And keep in mind, my FJ was heavily modified. For a stock or lightly modified Toyota, they had much less flex. They couldn't even reach the top of these ramps. At this point, you might be asking, why don't you simply use softer springs in the IFS so it matches the rear axle? Good thinking, but here are the reasons. First is a simple one. With a lower rate, we need a longer spring to maintain the same ride height. But on Toyota chassis, we simply don't have the room for that. The second reason has to do with suspension stiffness for different situations. As mentioned previously, the solid axle has two modes of movement. The tilting or pivoting action of the entire axle effectively create a softer stiffness for articulation. In contrast, independent suspension has only one mode of movement as well as one mode of stiffness. If we make the IFS soft enough for articulation, it will be too soft for everything else. Well, looks like the Jeep wins again by a landslide, at least in slow speed crawling type of off-road. But what about high speed and on-road driving? Let's find out next. I was once in an overland event up in Maine. We were doing some fall foliage tour on miles of logging roads. Pretty easy, relaxing stuff on high-speed washboard trails. Our group had a mix of Wranglers and various Toyotas. The Jeeps constantly lagged behind, so the entire group had to stop every so often. We thought they were just taking their time to soak in all the scenery. But to our surprise, they later told us they simply couldn't go any faster, or they felt like losing control. I always knew solid front axles don't handle well, but I was still shocked on just how soon these Jeeps reached their limit. During my test drive with Gene, how bumpy this JL road really stood out to me.
See the bump? It's harsh.
Some might think we can fix the rough ride with upgraded springs and shocks, like we did with these Fox shocks from Mopar. We did them mainly for the extra travel, but to be honest, we didn't feel much difference on ride quality at all. It is still miles away from how any Toyota can ride.
Yeah, definitely smoother.
Springs and shocks have their irreplaceable roles, but there are more fundamental factors that are beyond springs and shocks. The lack of up travel in this suspension really stood out to me. Yes, the tire goes up quite a bit during articulation, but when the axle goes straight up and down, we only have 1 inch of up travel before engaging the bump stops. We simply bottom out very often. And of course, there's the dependent nature of the left and right wheels. The very thing that gave us big flags is now hurting us on handling. Another key downfall of this JL is its steering. It has a surprising amount of dead space. Wow, this is a lot, man! How do you live with this? In driving, it almost manifests itself as a delay from user input to the vehicle actually start turning. It's better than the 2020. Okay, I feel the delay. Like there is a dead space when I do that because I want to turn the other way. I feel, oh shit, it's not turning. I turn more, then I go, oh, like that. Paired with how the front axles react over bumps, it feels much less predictable than the IFS. To this type of stuff. Ooh, when it hit the bump, it's kind of sideways kicking.
Of course. Well, because you're a solid axle in the front.
Keep in mind, Jean's JL was a brand new vehicle. As things wears out, the infamous death wobble could happen, which is never a concern for IFS. I do want to point out that handling is a very personal thing, and how each person reacts can be very different. After 1 hour of test drive, I still couldn't stand the steering on this JL. On the other hand, my friend Jean was not bothered at all. He drove 1,700 miles in 2 days, and it was a decent drive for him. Jean did notice the difference from his FJ, but to him, it was not a big deal. So yeah, I'm probably just a wimp. What I want you to take away is, there are many aspects to drivability, like hitting bumps, keeping it straight, body roll, and everyone reacts to each aspect differently. So if you are shopping between Jeep and Toyota, or any other IFS 4x4, don't solely rely on internet reviews. Go for a long test drive and experience it yourself. When it comes to reliability, Toyota guys are proud, but sometimes a little too proud. Under every Jeep versus Toyota reviews, probably including this one, you will see Toyota fans say things like, just wait until the Jeep breaks down on the trail. Well, if you let pride blindfold you, you already stopped learning. It is true, Toyota 4x4s has much better consumer report ratings than Jeep. Those reports rate vehicles as cars for daily driving. But for you who watch this channel, you probably want to go off-road and modify your rig. Then reliability will take on a slightly different definition. To illustrate this idea, I came up with this chart. It is nothing scientific, but simply illustrating a concept. The y-axis is how likely something breaks down. The higher this is, the less you can rely on this vehicle. The x-axis is how hard you wheel. At x equals 0, we're basically street driving. Over here, Toyota have a lower chance of problems than Jeep, just as consumer reports suggest. As we go up in trail difficulties, both vehicles will have a higher chance of breaking things, simply because there is more abuse. But I argue Toyota's chance will increase faster, mostly because it's less robust IFS. Eventually, there will be a point where these two lines cross, and the Wrangler will be less likely to break down on the trail. This point will be around the harder crawling stop, where you start seeing many Toyotas bending tie rods, steering knuckles, and breaking axles. And yes, arguably, most of these issues can be trail fixed, and Toyota is still less likely to have issues everywhere else. Nevertheless, a Wrangler is still the better bet to not have any hiccups at all. In other words, if you are doing hard enough wheeling, robustness will take precedence over the traditional sense reliability. Over many years of wheeling, as hard as the Toyota fans want to admit, I have seen far more Toyota than Jeeps broke down on those harder trails. So what's my take on Jeep versus Toyota? If you are a light wheeler, overlander, running around 33-inch tires and have no intention for hard obstacles, then I believe Toyota is objectively the better choice. IFS will handle much better on highway as well as washboard trails. You will also benefit from the baseline Toyota reliability. However, if you like running big tires, say 35s or above, and like conquering hard obstacles, in my opinion, the Wrangler is the better platform. You will have a much easier time in modification, and you will be much more capable and robust for hard wheeling. I want to point out that by no means I said you cannot wheel hard with Toyotas or have fun overlanding in Jeeps. It is just a matter of suitable versus more suitable. After all, building a 4x4 is rarely a pure rational game. For most of us, we're not here to compete. We do this to have fun and a deep sense of ownership. As a Toyota enthusiast, I'm treading the line here. I did all the suspension, drivetrain, and tires to do the harder wheeling. Inevitably, I sacrificed drivability and reliability, which are what Toyotas were good for. But sometimes, that's what enthusiasts do. So I really want to praise Jeep for offering serious, enthusiast-focused factory options like the Xtreme Recon Package. All that for just $4,000 and retain factory warranty? Unthinkable in Toyota world. We're just getting a bunch of TRD badging and paint colors.
For 2023, the TRD Pro Grade is available in the eye-catching solar octane color, a perfect visual complement for those who like to make a statement.
No wonder my friend Gene turned to the dark side. Being extremely conservative and lack of change is a big source of Toyota reliability. I highly value that, but still, it needs to be within proportion and trade-offs. With all the new competitors entering the game, I hope Toyota will step it up in their next generation 4x4s. We really need something legit. Alright, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.